it's about showing people that, Luc Rabouin is not Valérie Plante, and Luc Rabouin and Projet MTL can also can also represent that change.
Sure,
and that we have to think about, like, is Soraya and Ensemble really change, and is it also the change we want? Because I think a lot is at stake, and we need to kind of not only protect what we've done, but also look at the propositions that are on the table. And maybe you won't agree with everything that Projet MTL does, but we do have a clear vision, and we'll always be honest about that. And we know it won't always please everyone, but we're also not going to hide from people and pretend that we're promising everything to everyone.
Hi everyone, my name is Kalden Dhatsenpa, your host for Local 514. The Montreal municipal elections are going on, as are all municipal elections going on right now in Quebec. The ballot day, election day is coming up, November 2nd, and we are continuing our coverage here at CUTV. Lastly, I spoke with Jean-François Cacou of Futur Montréal, and today, someone from Projet is here, Logan Littlefield. Logan is the Projet candidate out in Verdun for borough councillor for the district of Champlain, Ile-des-Sœurs. Thank you for joining me, Logan.
Thank you so much for having me, Kalden.
Of course. So, campaign. I've been on a few. How's it going?
It's going good. As you know, campaigns are marathons, not sprints. So you need to conserve your energy. They also, for a lot of people, don't start just at the déclenchement or the writ drop on September 19th. They start well in advance. So we were campaigning, for a good month at least before then. And then it really kicks off, and getting your papers in and really accelerating the door-to-door and mobilizing all the volunteers. It's a lot of work. But the nice thing also at the municipal level is that in the boroughs, you're kind of working as a team too. So we have 7 candidates in Verdun. So there's pros to that and cons to that. The pros to that is that, hey, the workload is shared, and it's kind of a coordinated campaign. The cons is that obviously it's not even really a con, but 7 people with 7 personalities,
Of course, yeah.
to organize, and 7 opinions. But it's a joy, really, actually, like learning to work together better and working together as a team, because that's part of what politics is too.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I mean, how did you come across this opportunity? What brought you to municipal politics?
Well, it's a little complex in the sense that I've been involved in politics for quite some time now as a volunteer and as a member. So campaigns are nothing new to me. For the past number of years, I've been involved mostly at the federal level and as a kind of a dedicated volunteer and member. But then also a member of Projet for a while now at the local level, where I've attended some events and been involved in some ways. It was really a matter of, actually, through that experience at the federal level, I realized that some of my favorite things to do was really that, like, travail de terrain, or like the ground game work, really being close to people, going and talking to people at the doors. I loved doing that. It really spoke to kind of my personality and the type of things I like. And even though what brought me to politics originally was some like larger questions of, a just society and, healthcare and environment and stuff. Actually, my professional background is more in urban design and landscape architecture. So I know we'll maybe talk about that a little bit more. But then as I did that, I realized, well, hey, municipal politics, that's like where it's the most relevant, where, the built environment that's directly in front of us that we see every single day. Of course, all levels of government affect it to a certain degree, but whether it's development permits or designing a park or giving contracts or redesigning our roads, those are all like municipal issues, really. And also that idea that the unique political system in Montreal with the borough mayors, the city councillors, the borough councillors, with the boroughs that have quite a lot of autonomy, there's really this opportunity to, the borough councillor role is really like the first point of contact for residents in the district. And I'm a people person. I love being around people, and just that idea of being someone who could be really close to the ground, but also work on the issues from kind of a more policy direction side that I've been engaged with for a long time in my professional life. Kind of bringing those two things together was really exciting to me.
Yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer, I guess, when you think about it, especially your work as a landscape architect. It's like, that's going to be the most, I guess, put to use at a municipal level.
Exactly, yeah.
Tell me a bit about your work then.
As a landscape architect?
Yeah.
So when I was younger, I really loved everything to do with, maps and cities and things like that. And I thought, hey, I want to be an architect, or I want to be a city planner maybe. And then I studied my undergrad in the University of Manitoba, and I did this program called Environmental Design, which I believe there's a program at UQAM here as well, which is like a pre-professional degree that mixes landscape architecture, urban planning, interior design. And I realized that landscape architecture actually was a great blending of those two things. It wasn't just, the singularity of one building. It also wasn't, only policy and planning. It was like all these different types of scales, whether it's big regional ecological issues, whether it's someone's private garden, whether it's a street or a public plaza, like working at those variety of different scales, and the idea of like the democratic aspect too of like public space and what it means to create a public space that is useful socially, ecologically. I just like was really drawn to that.
Of course. I wonder, like, of this public spaces in Montreal, do you have any favorites? Do you have any that you go to and you're like, oh, this was designed well, or like, oh, I appreciate the craft at this place?
Oh, absolutely. I'll try not to only plug the ones that I've been involved with, but I mean, the ones that I use every single day. I think it's even on my profile on the Elections Montreal website. What's your favorite place in Montreal? And I said like the parks along the Fleuve Saint Laurent.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're absolutely blessed in Verdun to have that access to the water that a lot of places in Montreal don't have. Even though we're on an island, sometimes, especially if you're far from the water, and even if you're close to the water, sometimes you're not always seeing the water. So Verdun's a good example of like an exception to that, and I mean that's a big part of Projet MTL's platform too, is bringing back the city to the water and the water to the city too. So Verdun is already quite advanced in that regard. So there's the Verdun Beach. I love that design. It's almost it could have been double the size probably, right? It's almost
every time I go, it's packed.
Yeah, it's packed. Yeah. It's almost like a victim of its own success in some senses, because of there's maintenance issues and stuff, just because it is like almost a borderline overused. But that's also, you love to see, as a landscape architect, you love to see your projects well used like that. And I didn't design that project, but all of Parc Arthur Terrien, Parc Monseigneur Richard, just there's a collection of parks that all kind of run together. Parc des Rapides, which is much more naturalized and like an ecological zone. I just love those. Then on Nuns Island, you have all sorts of Parc du West Vancouver, which the administration now is currently redoing to formalize the access down to the water. There's beautiful places to access the water all across the borough, and I love that. I also love there's some like little jewels, like actually in the Sud-Ouest there's Parc Saint Paul or Square Saint Paul or Saint Pierre. I always get them mixed up. In Côte Saint Paul, that has like, it's a beautiful, like almost like Square Saint Louis on the plateau, but kind of like local neighborhood scale. I love those little gyms like that with like a beautiful fountain. Parc La Fontaine, obviously, and then of course like Olmsted's masterpiece, Parc du Mont-Royal. I mean, you can't beat that. Then there's lots. I could name a million, but Square Dorchester, love as well.
Yeah, Dorchester. Dorchester's lovely. I love Dorchester. It's nice space in the middle of downtown. I guess we're talking a bit about, like, this is sort of tangential to this, but I think to me, when I do these kinds of interviews on municipal politics, there's always this thing I run into, right, where unlike the feds, unlike the province, who get to get money through like income tax and like levies of other sorts, municipal governments are sort of bound to only get revenues through property taxes, right? And so that's always like one of the big questions, is like, is the next mayor gonna this election, it seems not really one of the central questions, but in the past it's always been like, who's gonna raise the property taxes the least? How is this gonna affect my kind of bottom line for whatever, owning a building, being a renter, and then having that passed on to me? And so because of the city has to rely on property taxes, the city is sort of invested in beautification, in kind of like improving beautification of neighborhoods. And also I would say to some extent like gentrification as well, right? Because like you make an area nice, then the property values go up, and then the city gets to have more revenue through that. Verdun is really interesting because I think Verdun is like maybe one of the more recent and I say recent in like a span of like, let's say like decades here, but like, Verdun, coolest neighborhood, Wellington, Verdun, coolest street in the world according to Time Out magazine. That was like back in 2022, and it's like, of course I agree with that, but to me there's always this thing of like these places that we make beautiful, that we make accessible with like bike lanes, metro stations, great culture and stuff like that, but then it's sort of like a scouts for like capital, right? Scouts for like making things more expensive, or for gentrification that's going to come out along the way. And I'm just curious. This is like, you can take this anywhere you want, but like I'm just wondering, like, how do you see these kinds of issues of like gentrification coming from things like property taxes, and how the city through like beautiful parks that like I'm all for, through like things like bike lanes, which I'm for, but how these things feed into gentrification.
Ooh, you're hitting the nail on the head of some big questions that I've actually given. I don't have the answers to necessarily, but but I'm constantly giving a lot of thought to because of my work outside of politics, and then as hopefully an elected official. So I mean, you're exactly right. There's a kind of two main issues. One is that cities, as you explained well, are like really reliant on property tax as their main point of revenue, and whereas provincial and federal governments have a lot more recourse to income taxes and diverse forms of revenue, and yet cities are tasked with more and more things. Back in the day, it was, it was roads and lighting and snow removal and garbage, and that's kind of it. And so maybe that made sense from property taxes as a direct, like I'm a ratepayer type of, you remember that term, like a ratepayer as opposed to citizen and stuff. And whereas now, for a variety of different reasons, but you have cities taking on a lot of different things. Now, parts of social services becomes the city's responsibility. Homelessness is a good example where different levels of government have either made funding cuts or it's not been a priority for them. Whereas, and so even though a priority, something like homelessness or social services should be a provincial issue, well, they're also in our streets right now. These are people that are our citizens that need help and need support. And just because it's not technically our jurisdiction, we're not in the throwing the ball around jurisdictional issues. We also want to act in the way that we can, also recognizing our limits. So there's that in terms of we're asked to do a lot more with limited amount of resources. And then the second complex issue is that there's perverse incentives with this, like the more things we do to improve the public realm, in the current system we're in, it's used as like, the baked in is the pretense of that, oh, well, it will raise property values, which then gets more revenue to then do more stuff. And it's kind of a bit of a vicious cycle, right? So it is complex. But then you don't want to say, well, we can't do nice things because we don't want to gentrify the neighborhood because like people deserve nice things. You don't want to say we're keeping the neighborhood dull and not green because we want to keep it affordable. Like that's not really a winning, like I don't think it's a winning political strategy or very ethical mindset either. So it's complex, and I think there are people in the political sphere and even within Projet MTL who've given some thought to that. And I think diversifying the revenue, the streams of the city. So one of the things that Projet is putting forward is, especially on the housing front, if we're talking about gentrification, is a fund called Bâtissons Montréal. And it's like an investment fund, kind of like the victory bonds effort of the Second World War, where it allows citizens and foundations and companies to invest in a real estate fund that is like a guaranteed municipal bond that will have guaranteed returns, but it's specifically for building affordable social and cooperative housing. So that's something, I mean, it's one component of it, but it's something that then can kind of counter the logic of we're completely relying on like, okay, we do a new infrastructure development and then it's going to be paid for, baked into the logic of how it's being paid for is the property tax increases around it. Of course, there is still some of that, but I think we're thinking of solutions of how can we get access to funds to fund big capital investments and fund new housing projects that aren't completely dependent on property taxes.
Well, yeah, you see those kinds of social impact bonds and used in Toronto. I always thought it was an incredible idea. We've spoken a bit to Faiz Abwani also by Breku, leads that kind of charge for bonds for housing, right? I guess I'm curious. Like you're doing door to door. What are people's concerns? What do you hear a lot at the door?
It is a mixed bag, but I mean, the number one thing that comes out is housing, as we've just been talking about. So just a general sense of the cost of living being too high. And people will even mention, people aren't always paying it. The average person doesn't care whose jurisdiction it is. They just care about how it affects their daily life, right? So they'll even mention grocery prices. But for sure, they'll talk about price increases, or even if people are relatively privileged and have a home that they say, it's good for me, but I'm worried about my kids or my neighbor's kids. So that's the number one thing that comes out. And then of course the homelessness crisis, which is very much linked. Some people, and it depends on which area you're in or which person you're talking to. Some people frame it as, there seems to be more misery in the streets and that's sad, but it's also giving a sense of insecurity. And other people, it's really from a sense of like empathy of like, why can't we do more to help these people in a country as rich as Canada? Like it's unacceptable. And I mean, I absolutely agree. So that's the number one thing. There is also questions hyperlocal questions about public transit, for example. You have some people in Verdun, where on the mainland part of Verdun, as we talked, that's not Nuns Island. We're trying to break that idea of like mainland Verdun and Nuns Island, and really have like a equity and unifying the sense of it's all Verdun, but still you still have to figure out a way to talk about one. And we have 3 metro stations, so we're quite well served by public transit in certain sectors of Verdun, but those metro stations aren't accessible either. They don't have elevators. So that's something that, again, that type of financing needs to come from another level of government, for the most like a big investment like that. So we're going to continue to push for that. That's a priority for us. Then there's also questions about bus service with the arrival of especially on Ile des Sœurs, with the arrival of the REM, which at its base, I love trains. I'm actually a big train nerd, and I used to work for Via Rail even. So I would always take train over bus, like personally. At the same time, so it's a higher order of transit, which at its base is good, but it's had some negative impacts in the sense that there has been reorganization of the bus lines in Ile des Sœurs, and for some people, if you live right next to the REM station, well, it's a lot easier to get downtown. The time has been cut in half. But if you don't live right next to the REM station, well, you've lost some of the frequency and some of the connections to buses that went direct downtown because they've reorganized. So you also, when you do things like that, you obviously need to give it a few years to test out how people can change their patterns and stuff. But you can't deny the fact that some people are saying, I'm tempted to get a car now because of, even though we've added this level of public transit. So there's stuff that I'd like to work on too, in terms of really making sure that frequency is there, and that the buses go to the places we need to get to, so that people who are already, more isolated than some other parts of Verdun, living on an island. But when we add a new piece of transit, that it actually increases the transit offer and doesn't limit it in another sense. So there's things like that. Of course, there's issues of, park maintenance. People would like more infrastructures for sports and leisure for all ages. There's missing some spaces for maybe adolescents too. Of course, questions of construction sites and coordination and bike lanes and all sorts of things, the full gamut. But I mean, the number one is housing.
Yeah. Bike lanes is sort of the one that a lot of people are talking about. It's the question that's always pushed onto the mayoral candidates I see. I mean, I think there's a poll done by Léger where it showed that, like, on the topic of bike lanes for this municipal election, something like 31% of people were in favor of it, but gosh, more than 50% of people kind of wanted, like, some kind of pause to it. I'm kind of curious what you think about that, because I mean, on this show we're very bike friendly, but I do think there has been some occasions where it does seem like the project of building up the biking infrastructure in the city was sort of done maybe without, like, it depends on the borough, of course, but without, like, regard for, like, actual community needs, or whether or not like I think of, like, specific, like, Park X and Saint Michel, where there's, like, protests against it, and these are mainly, like, these are neighborhoods of mostly, like, people of color, right, racialized people, and I always think it's kind of this interesting kind of, like, flare up between this project that is, I think, all well and good, and we're not going to talk about whether, because I know the main thing for bike lanes, people are always like, oh, it's like, people complain about being bad for business or making more traffic. I don't think we're not really of that kind of thinking about it, but I do see there being a sort of tension between certain kind of racialized communities in Montreal and these bike lanes, and then, of course, going back to the main topic, a general kind of, like, hesitation towards bike lanes. I'm kind of curious how you approach that kind of topic.
Yeah, I think I do approach it in the sense of sometimes it is a perception issue. I think bike lanes are something that have really, especially in a kind of northern climate like Montreal, it was pretty radical, I guess, to have this much investment in a bike lane and the Réseau Express Vélo and stuff. It was, really a clear priority that was put into place by the Projet MTL administration. And it's something that, cars still take up the vast majority of the space in our public realm, if we're being realistic. But at the same time, it's a physical change that is really visible to people. So even though there's lots of other priorities and lots of other work done, I think in this world where there's a lot of insecurity, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of precarity, well, that's something that can sometimes be easy to it's a physical change that is there that has changed how people get around quite significantly, whether you're on a bike or whether you're not on a bike. So it's something to latch onto in a pro or con way too, and think, like, the level of priority that was given to it compared to other things, I think some people are maybe concerned by. So that's something we have to reckon with. And I think sometimes it is just because it is something that's very physical and tangible that you see, there's an impression that it was like the number one priority of the administration, even if that's not the case. But then we also have to deal with the fact that, like you mentioned, it's not always just, more privileged people who want to drive their cars or against it. There are like racialized and working class people in certain neighborhoods that it also becomes a symbol of like, well, we're dealing with other issues too. Was this bike lane really a priority? And we're reckoning with the fact that there was that some of these people, more working class communities, also have to travel longer distances for work. Sometimes there isn't public transit to those places, and so they have to rely on cars, whether it's getting a ride or their own car as well. So it's not only wealthy people that are dependent on cars, right? So I think that is a reality, and like you said, these things become a symbol, even if in the long run there's people of all ages and all income backgrounds that really benefit from active mobility as well. So I think that's where we're seeing the shift in focus of saying, hey, we're not at all apologizing for bike lanes. This was something that needed to be done, and we're really proud of the network that has been built. And in the next mandate, it's really about creating some missing links. It's about securing and making better the ones that already exist, as there's lessons learned, as there always is with new infrastructure developments. But now, as we take less space away from the car, we need to also make sure there's alternative options. So, because it's not in the spirit of punishing cars, it's in the spirit of securing the mobility of everyone, whether you're in a car, a bike, or a pedestrian, or a bus, or a metro. And now realize that like these further flung and working class neighborhoods where there is more reliance on bus and car, and it's not as realistic to commute downtown by a bike. Well, that's why we are investing massively in rapid bus routes and stuff. It's like kind of like the metro on the street, to really that's something that the city has more control over, is the bus system, that we don't have to wait on other levels of government for big, REM or metro extensions, et cetera. So it's like the next phase is like, yes, there was a lot of energy put on bike lanes, and we're proud of that. It's not about going backwards. We're protecting that, but we're also not going to see the same level of development of new ones in the next mandate, because the next step is to really reinforce the public transit option to address some of those concerns in communities, especially where a bike lane maybe becomes a symbol of misplaced priorities, whether that's based in fact or not. It remains a perception, and we need to take that seriously.
No, totally. I think I agree with your point about how it's like the thing about like municipal politics is that, I mean, people always say like it's where you see change like the quickest and the most immediate, right? And I guess to that, it's like, oh, you see like, I voted for this, and now you get to see it over the mandate, but then I guess it's also the thing of like, you also see things like pop up like bike lanes, right? It's just the most immediate. You walk out your door and boom, it's there, and you're like,
Exactly.
oh, this is new. I can point my finger at the people in City Hall, and they're like, they did this, right? So there's that kind of immediacy to it. I guess that's good, because it's, if you vote for it, it's great. If you didn't vote for it, then it's like you get that. Currently at the moment, Ensemble Montréal, led by Soraya, is sort of leading the polls. I'm kind of wondering like, what do you make of that? What do you think?
Vibe check on the polls.
yeah, vibe check. Yeah. What do you think? What do you think about a potential, I guess, ensemble-led government, right? Because it's like Projet was been elected twice. First in like 2017, then again in 2021. They were able to hold on to it, but now it's like it's sort of like this time of like, Valérie Plante is no longer the leader. She's not running for re-election again. We have really like new faces on the municipal front. And I'm kind of wondering, I don't know, how do you see his current municipal moment?
I think it's an important one. There's a lot at stake, and but you're right. It's new faces, and the polls. To address the polls for a moment, I think it's true. The headlines that come out, the media cycle that starts is, there's Soraya and Ensemble are ahead by X amount of points, but an 8 or 9 point lead when it's 55 to 47. Well, that's really concerning. When it's 20 to 12 or 13. And with a 45% undecided, that's a completely different story, right? So it depends. So I think the biggest thing that we see is the undecided vote, and that's a huge opportunity, because Projet MTL, as an established party since 2004, with a base of members and like a lot of democratic instances and associations and a membership base, we're really known as being really on the ground and meeting voters door to door. That's really our strength. So we see the number of undecided voters as a huge opportunity. We know making sure people get to know Luc Rabouin because he, even though he's been in politics since 2019 as mayor of the Plateau, he just isn't as well known as Valérie Plante. That's just a fact of the world. Valérie Plante, really marked when she entered the scene in municipal politics. First woman mayor, very charismatic, bubbly, friendly, huge smile, right? And just like really, and then as the mandate went on, of course, like, figures like that can become polarizing as well, right? But I think we can't deny that she really marked and changed the perception of what a mayor can be in Montreal. And we see the tangible kind of results and change to Montreal since her tenure. And Luc Rabouin, it's about making sure people get to know him. And so that's what that big undecided number, I think it's a huge opportunity for us. And we're seeing that the more people see Luc Rabouin and hear from him, the more they like him, get to know his personality, get to know that he is a different personality, but he's also very funny. He's very quick. He's very rigorous. He knows the files. And we see that people want change. But when we look at the other side, when we look at Soraya and Ensemble, we see that, yes, it's a different party that's been in power for the last 8 years. But one, it's not really change in the sense it's kind of like the same old figures that are, old provincial and federal deputies and stuff. Soraya Martinez has changed parties 5 times and, left the Liberal Party when she thought it was kind of a sinking ship so that she could come back to Montreal and run for mayor. There's a... So it's really that aspect that, yes, it's the same party, but we have tons of new candidates. Luc is a new person. That Projet MTL is also that change. We're continually a party of, engaged residents and people with diverse set of backgrounds that are really anchored in their communities. And we're always anchored in those same values, but it's not just the exact same thing carried over and over. It manifests itself in different ways depending on who the candidates are. And it's about showing people that, Luc Rabouin is not Valérie Plante, and Luc Rabouin and Projet MTL can also can also represent that change.
Sure, yeah.
And that we have to think about, like, is Soraya and Ensemble really change, and is it also the change we want? Because I think a lot is at stake, and we need to kind of not only protect what we've done, but also look at the propositions that are on the table. And maybe you won't agree with everything that Projet MTL does, but we do have a clear vision, and we'll always be honest about that. And we know it won't always please everyone, but we also not going to hide from people and pretend that we're promising everything to everyone. We have a clear vision, we have clear ideas, and it's about communicating that and building trust with the population.
So this election, you spoke briefly about Ensemble. I'm kind of, what do you make of this kind of this party that's sort of on the left flank now of Projet, right? Because it's something that people are saying that. So I'm speaking about Craig Sauvé and his party, Transit Montreal. There's talk about how, like, Projet sort of has become, like, maybe institutionalized because of that kind of power, and there's a couple, I guess, like, people who want a little more of that kind of, like, the classic term I always see is, like, the idealism of, like, Projet as, like, back in 2017, right? Some people feel that's been lost, and now this election cycle, I feel like that's manifested with this kind of new party on the leftward flank. And I'm kind of curious, what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think more people engaging in politics is always a good thing. And there's a lot of overlap between values and, even friendships between people and and stuff between Transition Montréal and Projet Montréal. So I don't think having more options is ever a bad thing. It's good to get those ideas out there, and Transition is bringing up a lot of good ideas too, and bringing certain things to the forefront. Me personally, I still think that a lot is at stake in this election, and I really do think that Luc Rabouin is the kind of person of the moment, and Projet MTL has the vision of the moment, and that the vision of Ensemble and Soraya is it's just not there. It's lacking in vision, and I think a lot of the things that are coming there's some dangerous things under the surface that are being kind of papered over too.
Like what?
Well, I'm thinking in terms of, like, not taking clear positions on things, like really courting something, like you mentioned, bike lanes as one example, courting a bike lane, an anti-bike lane vote, but then saying, oh no, we're actually not anti-bike lanes. Oh no, we're not going to remove them. Well, what exactly are you going to do then? Like, not this, it's always kind of this beware of people who, and parties and institutions that kind of say a lot without saying anything. I think that's kind of more what I mean. Same on the housing front, whether it's the Airbnb debacle, whether it's the,
you want to talk a bit about the Airbnb debacle for listeners who might not be aware?
Sure. Just the change in the change in rhetoric and the change in policy position over the past number of weeks from the Ensemble side. was coming out saying that wanting to expand the period that people can rent their apartments on Airbnb to the whole year. Of course, we came out critiquing that and saying that we're defending our position of limiting it only to the summer months because that's something that is enforceable. It allows there to be like a boost in availability of units for tourists and stuff in the peak tourist months, but then also a period where it's clearly banned so that you can, when you know, as soon as you know that there's something up on the website, well then you know that then that's in contravention of the law and that that's illegal. So there is the rhetoric of Ensemble was just very kind of back and forth and having to come out and clarify their position and saying a lot of stuff that didn't really make a lot of sense and wasn't enforceable. So that's kind of what I'm referring to. And then I guess back to your original question, I just do think that for me personally, Projet MTL is still a very good vehicle for the left. I'm someone who considers myself on the left as well. And I think that, of course, as a party becomes a party that is in power, you do make your coalition a little bit larger naturally. As we've also, Projet started as a party on the plateau mainly of people who were really engaged with the environment and really engaged with sustainable urbanism. And that's still part of our DNA today. But now we've also expanded to, we have presence in and mayoralties and city councillors from, all corners of the city. It's not just the central quarters. And that has brought in different perspectives, and different people from different racial and ethnic and class backgrounds and stuff too, that we didn't see that as much in the early days of Projet MTL. So I think, of course, some people who are on, kind of like really the militant idealistic side of things and remember how it was in the back, they might see, yes, it is more institutionalized, it is more professionalized, but there's also a lot of positive things that come with that too, in terms of we've brought other people into our coalition and that has enriched those ideas and made them more concrete and realizable too. And when I look at the people who've stepped up to be candidates or have been elected officials in Projet MTL, and who have stuck to their word and implemented these things in their boroughs. I mean, that's really what drew me to Projet, and I still think it's a really, really good vehicle for the left. So I support the new ideas that are being brought forth by new parties. But for me, it's about a lot is at stake, and I think Projet is still a really good vehicle for those ideas.
Gotcha. So it's transition, great to have more players at the table, especially in the democratic sense, right? Plurality of ideas is always great, but for you, Projet is still a viable vehicle.
Exactly.
Gotcha. So I'm curious now. Let's say November 2nd, you're elected. First off, future you, congratulations.
Thank you.
Second, what's going to be your priority?
Well, I'm going to say two things broadly, but my priority is going to be affordable housing and then also public spaces that are resilient, that are accessible, that are vibrant. So on the housing front, and I'm really glad that, because that was a big priority for me, I'm really glad that that's not only in our local platform in Verdun, but also in the Central City platform, just priority number one. So whether that's protecting the existing rental stock that's there, and rooming houses and stuff as part of our platform for speculation. We have a few rooming houses in Verdun, and that's something that's often not talked about as a missing piece in the housing puzzle. That is often people who are living in rooming houses. If those weren't there, those are the types of people who would be on the street.
Right.
So I was really, really proud of that being part of the platform, and that's something that is really important for Verdun as well. Then there's problems with kind of like bad landlords that leave their apartments and their buildings in disarray, and I'm really looking forward to have like reinforced rules that's part of our platform in terms of like stricter penalties and more inspectors and more frequent visits to facilitate property owners that leave their buildings in bad conditions to renovate them. Or to upkeep them. Then there's also like an enormous amount of development pressure all across the city, and especially on Ile des Sœurs in Verdun. So really making sure that those developments, that the tools that the borough has, the levers that we have at our disposal, are well used to get community benefits. So whether that's especially social and affordable housing in these developments, with simplified rules that we're proposing from the central city, or whether it's just making sure that there's public realm improvements and services that come along with things, so that it's not new development isn't always just more people, more pressure and stuff, but that it's well integrated into the fabric of the community, and so that's really important to me. Also, in terms of the public space front, one of the big things is just making sure there's more intergenerational spaces. So it's not just playgrounds for little kids, or it's not just a skate park for adolescents, but sometimes when you kind of have spaces where you have like a a diverse offering of all these things. Verdun has like lots of young families, but it has lots of old folks homes and 55 plus condos and stuff like that. So there's like a huge mix of ages. So that idea of like community spirit and intergenerational public space is important to me. And then also finding ways to expand like resilience in these spaces too. So using them to capture rainwater to adapt ourselves to climate change.
Right, of course, yeah. Sponge parks. Big
Exactly.
deal. Well, I think that's about it for my questions today, Logan. Thank
Okay.
you very much for coming on to the show.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Talk to us about. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, can I say one more thing before the end?
Please.
Because this is a university student podcast show, this is the first municipal election where they'll be voting on campus.
Oh.
That's normally only a federal election thing.
Yeah.
So reminder that it makes it really, really easy, a lot easier if you're a student on campus to go vote. And those voting days are up on the Elections Montreal website. I believe for Concordia and McGill, it is the days just following the advance polls for everyone. So on the 27th, 28th, 29th is the student vote on campus, and you can vote in your district of wherever you live. They have all the ballot papers for the whole city.
That's great.
Yeah.
Look at that. You know what to do, students. Get voting. You've just listened to Logan Littlefield, borough councillor candidate for Projet MTL out in Champlain, Ile-des-Sœurs, in the borough of Verdun. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers, everyone.